He said, "Don't cry." And I wasn't. Not then. Not anymore. I had cried the day he came home smelling like someone else's perfume and still swore it was mine. I had cried when he didn't even flinch as I crumbled. But that night, the night I forgave him, I was already made of stone. There was no dramatic thunderstorm outside, no wineglass shattering on the floor. Just the low hum of the fridge and the sound of my heart doing something it hadn't done in months, growing quiet. I watched him eat dinner with his eyes glued to the TV, and I realized I had finally stopped hoping. It didn't happen all at once. No betrayal ever does. It starts as little silences. A missed call, a cold shoulder, a subtle shift in how they say your name. He used to say it like it was sacred, like every syllable carried a memory. Now it just sounded like a formality. There were nights I lay awake rehearsing what I'd say if I ever found proof, what I'd scream, how I'd leave. But when the moment finally came, when her name flashed on his phone at 1:43 a.m., I didn't scream. I just stared at it, stared at the truth I already knew printed in pixels I could never unsee. And something inside me, a little girl who used to believe in happy endings, quietly died. The next morning I made him coffee. 2 sugars, 1 lie. I stayed. Not because I was weak, but because I wasn't ready to leave with nothing. He had taken years from me. My youth, my softness, my dreams I'd shelved in his name. And I wanted them back. All of them. So I played the role. The forgiving woman. The one who understands men have needs. The one who wants to make it work. I let him believe he had won. But every night while he snored beside me, I was planning. Not a tantrum, not revenge sex. No, I was rebuilding. In silence, in layers, in fire. He didn't notice when I stopped asking where he was. He didn't notice when I stopped talking about my day. He didn't even notice when I stopped saying, "I love you." Men like him don't notice absence until it's final. I started dressing differently. Not for him, for me. I started eating alone. In places we used to go together. But I didn't sit in the shadows. I sat by the windows. I wanted the world to see the woman he'd forgotten. I found the parts of me he tried to erase, the laughter that didn't need his approval, the ambition that no longer made him feel small. And one night when he came home and tried to touch me, I flinched. Not because I was angry, because I was done pretending I still belonged to him. He asked if something was wrong. I said, "Nothing you'd understand." And he laughed. Like I was cute. Like I was a puppy gnawing at the leash he'd put on me. So I smiled, because men like him mistake silence for submission. But I had become a storm with no warning. He thought he still had me. Even as I was slipping through his fingers like smoke, I started going out without telling him. Started laughing a little louder at parties. Started making eye contact with men who looked me in the eye, not down my shirt. And still he thought it was a phase, that I'd come back like I always had. But I wasn't lost. I was remembering. Remembering who I was before I loved him. Before I tied my worth to his approval. Before I let him decide what parts of me were too loud, too much, too inconvenient. There was a night, and I remember it, down to the scent of my own shampoo, when I looked in the mirror and whispered, "You're almost there." He was already asleep. That night, I didn't kiss his forehead like I used to. Didn't tuck myself into the crook of his arm like I used to. I slept on the edge of the bed, closer to the exit. It's strange, the things you start noticing when you've detached. Like how loud someone chews, or how many times they say sorry without meaning it, or how their touch once Electric now feels like static. He started noticing too, but too late. He noticed I stopped checking in. He noticed I didn't ask where he was, who he was with, why he came home late again. He noticed I didn't fight anymore, and that scared him more than my anger ever did, because anger meant I still cared. But silence was a tomb. There was dinner, a Thursday night. We sat across from each other like strangers pretending to play house. He said, "You've changed." And I smiled, the kind of smile women wear when they've seen the truth and can't unsee it. I said, "Maybe I just stopped hiding." He laughed like he always did when he didn't understand. A nervous, hollow laugh. He didn't know he was dining with his own expiration date. Behind the scenes, I was becoming someone else. No, not someone else. Myself without the leash. I went back to school, took night classes, wrote poetry again, the kind I used to write before he said it was too emotional. I found friends I'd abandoned to make space for his moods. He didn't know any of it, because I didn't tell him, because it wasn't for him. Every secret step I took away from him tasted like honey on a tongue that had known only ash. He started getting insecure, jealous. The same man who had once paraded his infidelity in the open was now suspicious of my every move. "Where are you going? Dressed like that? Who were you laughing with on the phone? Why are you always so distant lately?" I gave him nothing. Not rage, not reassurance. Just silence. Because what do you say to a man who taught you to lie by never telling the truth? And then one night he said it. The sentence I had been waiting for. "I feel like you don't love me anymore." I looked up from my book, took a breath, closed the last chapter of the last lie, and I said, "I don't." Not softly, not cruelly, just fact delivered like a key turning in a lock. He stared at me like he'd just realized I was real, like he hadn't seen me before, not fully, because he hadn't. He never saw me. Just the version of me that fed his ego, soothed his guilt, and forgave what should have been unforgivable. He followed me around the house for days after that, suddenly attentive, suddenly remorseful. "I'll do better. We can fix this. I need you." It would have worked once, but not anymore. Because here's the thing about forgiveness. It's not always an invitation back. Sometimes it's a door you close so you can finally walk away without carrying the weight of their shame. I forgave him. Yes. In the quiet way that only the truly done can. But I never forgot. Not the nights I stared at the ceiling trying to believe I deserved better. Not the way he made me feel like a burden for needing what he had promised. Not the moment I realized I was shrinking just to fit inside his shadow. I didn't need revenge. I just needed a life that no longer included him. The day I left wasn't cinematic. It was bright, sunny. A Tuesday. He was at work. I packed in silence, the way a woman packs when she's been preparing for this longer than she admits. Every shirt folded was a chapter closed. Every drawer emptied was a memory discarded. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe him poetry or explanation. He knew. He always knew I'd eventually remember who I was. I rented a small place. 1 bedroom. No dishwasher. But peace. God, it was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that makes your chest ache, the kind that makes you breathe for the first time in years. I decorated slowly, hung up art that was too dramatic for his taste, cooked pasta at midnight, slept diagonally in bed, and for the first time I wasn't waiting for anything. Not an apology, not closure, not a knock on the door. But he did come. Of course he did. 3 months later, standing at my doorstep like regret personified. He said he missed me, said he made a mistake, said he couldn't stop thinking about me. And I let him talk, because some men only learn through silence, through the emptiness of a home that no longer welcomes them, through the echo of their own mistakes. He asked if we could try again, and I said, "You killed the version of me that would have said yes." He stood there for a while, looking for the girl who used to beg for his love. But she wasn't home. She had moved out long before I ever did. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, like a boy who'd broken something fragile. But I wasn't fragile anymore. He looked around my apartment like he was scanning for proof I'd missed him. He didn't find any. No framed photos of us. No empty space where his shoes used to be. Just candles that actually got lit. Books I finally had time to finish. Laughter from the radio instead of tension humming in the walls. This was my life now, and there was no room in it for someone who once taught me to live small. He asked if I hated him. It was the only honest question he'd asked in years. And I told him the truth. No, I just don't care enough to. Hate would have meant I was still tethered, still aching, still hoping he'd bleed a little when I pulled away. But I had already let go, and that's what scared him the most. Not the fury, but the indifference. You see, people like him are addicted to control, but they mistake it for love. They think if they can keep you orbiting their gravity, they've won. But I had broken free. And when a woman detaches, truly detaches, she doesn't come back. Not as a lover, not as a savior, not even as a friend. I didn't slam the door when he left. Didn't block his number, didn't need to. He stopped calling, because even men like him know when they've been forgotten in a way no apology can undo. That night I sat on my floor with a glass of wine. No tears, no music. Just the hum of freedom settling in my bones. I whispered, thank you not to him, but to the version of me who endured long enough to rise. Months passed, then a year, and somewhere in the middle of all that time I found something unexpected: stillness. Not the stillness of waiting, the stillness of no longer needing anything from someone who took so much. I stopped checking his socials, stopped wondering if he was with her or someone else. I didn't care. His world became background noise in a life I no longer shared. And then one day, I saw him. Not intentionally. Just a sidewalk crossing, his hand in someone else's. He looked older, tired. That same distracted look in his eyes that once made me feel invisible. She looked like I used to nervous, eager smiling too much. And I wanted to reach out and say, run. But I didn't. Because some lessons aren't taught, they're survived. He didn't see me. But that was the best part. I was unrecognizable. Not because I'd changed my hair or my clothes, but because I no longer carried his shadow. I had returned to myself, and she was radiant. I built a life brick by brick. A career I was proud of. A circle of women who saw me, held me, reminded me I was never too much. Sunday mornings filled with books, plants, and coffee I didn't have to share with resentment. And every now and then I'd think about him, not with longing, but with awe. That I ever made myself so small for someone so unworthy. He taught me pain, but I taught myself power. He thought he broke me, but all he did was sharpen my edges. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I did. Because forgiveness was my way of cutting the final thread. Because I refused to carry his sins on my back any longer. But forget, no. Forgetting would mean I could repeat it. And I will never go back to that version of me. The one who begged to be seen. the one who measured her worth by the warmth of a man's gaze. So here's what I wish I'd known: closure is not something they give you. It's something you give yourself. And revenge, it doesn't always come with blood or screaming. Sometimes it looks like peace, like joy without permission, like becoming someone they can never reach again. That's how you make them regret everything, by no longer being theirs to hurt. Somewhere between forgetting his birthday and forgetting the sound of his voice, I remembered mine. The real one. The one that used to sing in the shower and laugh mid-sentence. The one that didn't tremble after every argument. The one that didn't apologize just for existing with needs. There is a certain holiness in surviving something you thought would break you, and an even deeper holiness in not becoming bitter. I wasn't his victim anymore. I was my own witness to the ruin, to the rebuild, to the quiet triumph of waking up one day and not loving him anymore and not needing to. I still have days when the past brushes against me like a cold wind, a memory triggered by a scent, a song, a word someone says with the same careless tone he used to use. But it doesn't undo me. It doesn't shake me. Because healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without bleeding. And I don't bleed for him anymore. People ask why I never really dated after him, why I chose solitude over romance. And I always smile. Because they don't know what it feels like to find peace after living in a war zone. They don't know how sacred it is to sit alone in your own company and not feel the hollow echo of someone else's indifference inside you. They don't know that love, real love, doesn't feel like hunger. It feels like coming home. And I hadn't come this far to beg for scraps again. He reached out once more. 2 years after I left. An email. Short. Tense. Almost apologetic. He said he still thought of me. That I was the one that got away. That he finally understood. I read it once. Didn't respond. Didn't delete it either. I let it sit there like a dead flower pressed between pages of a book I'll never reopen. Because it's not my responsibility to teach a man how to value a woman he had already broken. And I was not a second chance. I was the lesson. Some stories don't end with vengeance or fireworks. Some end with nothing at all, just a door that closes and a woman who no longer looks back. I used to think I needed closure from him, a confession, an apology. But the truth, he gave me all the closure I needed every time he let me cry myself, to sleep every lie he told with steady eyes, every time he watched me unravel and chose not to catch me. That was the closure, the proof. And now I live in the freedom of that proof. I wrote him letters once. Not to send, just to write. To say everything I never had the chance to say. But I don't need them anymore. I don't need to scream into the void to feel heard. Because the version of me who needed answers no longer exists. She evolved. Shed her skin in silence. And became someone even I didn't recognize for a while. But now I see her everywhere. She walks into rooms without apology. Laughs without restraint, says no without explanation, sets fires where she used to build bridges. And she wears her past like armor, not shame. She is not afraid to be alone. She is not afraid to be too much. She is not afraid to start over with nothing except her own voice, steady and full. I forgave him. Yes. Because I needed to burn the rope, not carry the knot. But I never forgot. Because some scars are sacred. Some pain is a compass. Some stories, even the brutal ones, are how we find our way home. And if he thinks of me now, I hope it stings. Not because I wish him pain, but because I want him to know he had a woman made of stars and wildfire, and he chose to dim her, Now she burns elsewhere, unreachable, unrepentant, untouchable. So, no, this isn't a story about a woman scorned. This is a story about a woman reborn, not because of him, but in spite of him. And that is how I made him regret everything, by becoming unforgettable.